What is up, YouTube? It's Aaron back here with On the Bubble, and we're back with the OG cast. We just got back from YCS Anaheim. Rahan was over there bumming it on the sidelines. How are you doing, my friend?
Dude, we are so back. I know like the viewers missed us, so Logan and I were like, no, we can't miss this episode.
For
Yeah,
sure.
it's true. They liked the new experiences, but they definitely appreciate your optimism, your perspective. Logan, I know I saw you a bit. How was your weekend overall?
It was a pretty good weekend. First like real event playing under the new time rules, first YCS under the new format. Um Pretty much first time like playing a real tournament with like Marshmallow and cards from the new set as well.
Hmm.
But it went okay. I finished top 32, which is, debatable if it's a top, I guess, or not now. So
Are you proud of your
I finished.
accomplishment?
Am I proud of
32.
the accomplishment? I am proud. I went 11-3. That's, not super easy to do. So,
Yeah.
and I got the pricing for it. So I'm pretty happy with it. Would I like to go further? Of course, the
Yeah.
goal is to win the event, but there are also there's steps on the way to get there.
Not everyone can win the event, Gotta
Yeah.
be content with where you're at. All right, so breakdown for today. We're gonna discuss a little bit of our prep leading up to the event, like kind of our perception going into it. Specifically, me and Logan. Rahan was helping us prep, so he'll give us a little insight as well. We'll go over our individual tournament experiences, and then Rahan will give us a bit of his perspective watching the stream and talking to his friends that were there. We'll do top cut and some discuss below with a little bit of breakdown of the format post Anaheim and obviously in relation to Neal and Klima. And then we'll do some takeaways afterwards. The format, the tournament structure, and the time rules, how it affected everybody. And then we'll do a little bit of review of Genesys and how that played out, because there was a lot of coverage over that tournament over the weekend. So let's get right into it. So, leading into the event, we saw a lot of, we'll say, fair decks. We saw Mitsurugi, we saw a little bit of Draco Tail, we saw the Yummy deck. And then we saw kind of like the innovation of the hybrid Mitsu Yummy deck coming out of those two YCSs. And then we go into Anaheim, and it's I think pretty similar to what we talked about last weekend. Obviously, y'all weren't there, but I think like a lot of the predictions that were made, like I think Cormac predicted Crystron Kanan, that ended up performing well again with Kamal's performance. But yeah, like I think we obviously anticipated Mitsuyami becoming popular, Super Poly, Droll, like all those cards doing well, but I don't think we all really anticipated the shift as drastic as it was to just like floodgates and all of that. So Rahan, you were helping us prepare a little bit. How did you perceive that things were gonna adjust, and thoughts on that?
Sure. So I'd like to preface with like, just for context, for I guess anybody that doesn't know, I'm basically on a competitive hiatus, so I'm not playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Probably competitively until 2026. But it's been really cool because I've been able to take this time and basically become like the guy in the chair, where I'm just like helping everyone else for their list. So for this event, I think I was like in the double digits for like how many people I was helping prep for this event. I think it was like close to 15 different people, helping like review gameplay, look at lists. Um, so I had like somewhat of like a diverse sort of perspective in terms of like what people were preparing, and it was really interesting to see how wholesome everyone was in terms of like the deck list that they were preparing. I didn't see like floodgates, like, and I pitched like D barrier to like a lot of people, right? Whether it be in Draco Tail and other decks, and a lot of like the perception that I got back was no, we don't want a card that just like floods our opponent out of the game. We want to be able to like get value out of our cards, right? And so people, for example, like the Draco Tail duelist, that I was helping, even though D-Berry is such a strong card, they're like, no, we value the Fenrir and the value that we gain off of Fenrir more than the turn skip that D-Berry provides us. So it was really interesting to see that, despite helping what I would say, I think 15 really high level players, I didn't see that trend. But then to see Anaheim just be like D Fisher, Patchy, D Barrier, Protos, hand looping, um, stuff like that was just like, okay, this is really well timed because I think it took a lot of people blindsided. Although a card like Protos was discussed a lot in some of the Draco Tail duelists that I was helping. For example, before people were discussing branded fusion, they were also talking about, hey, what if we use Cartesia to go into Grand Guignol, send Protoss with that, and then add it back with Arthalion, and then be able to like summon it out, right? And then because of Grand Guignol, which I think is a light or dark, I'm
Like,
not sure. It's a light. Okay, so yeah, then it gives you the option to call light against Yami, and then dark against like Mitsu variants. And so when those conversations started, I immediately thought about what Logan said, right? like way like back in like a couple episodes before, where it's like, okay, this is all like, roses and like a honeymoon period, but eventually we will become degenerates. So, and that's basically what happened at Anaheim. I think people capitalized on the fact that, Droll wasn't in the main decks. People were on board breakers a lot, and they capitalized on it. And we saw hand loops, we saw floodgates left, right, and center, and that basically became what Anaheim was for a lot of people viewing it. So that was like a sort of confuzzled way of saying Anaheim was not what I was expecting it to turn into, and I think it took a lot of people like by surprise.
Yeah, Logan. So you obviously ended up on a pretty pure yummy list. So how did you reach
Yep.
that conclusion? Obviously, like we ended up on different decks, but I think we had similar premises behind the ideas.
Yeah, so most of our playtesting was kind of under the perception of like the Lil format with like a little bit of an idea that we thought there was going to be, some like Ibli locks, some Protoss locks. The artifact lock was something that we were aware of, but we didn't actually think it would see like that much play. So we weren't really respecting it all too much. But like D-Fissure, that was definitely something we were playtesting against constantly. Skill Drain, D-Barrier, a lot of these floodgates. And the pure Yummy deck really like didn't have any silver bullets to it. It didn't have any one card that we felt like we're constantly losing to. I think the closest thing to that was maybe Super Poly. But the thing about Pure Yummy is that even if you get Super Polyed, your deck has so much non-engine, especially post side. You have really strong non-engine that you can play through that. So I thought it was like the most consistent deck, the most non-engine. The other thing is too is against like a lot of the gimmicky decks, um, and a lot of the inconsistent decks, like Dominus Purge just shuts those decks down. You can stop them with one purge a lot of the time. The only like major concern we had with the Yummy deck was post side trying to beat like board breakers. So we really looked into like different M board pieces, and I think Logan Shepard and I sat there for like 2 hours looking at every possible thing you could add to the Yummy M board. I'm telling you guys, like we literally went through like we had a point where we could get Naturia Beast on our M board with the Yummy cards with like Hate Rose Witch. We had like Ibli. We had Hyper Librarian to like draw 4. We had the Yummy Trap card in our deck to try to draw, try to put it in our grave. And the thing we ultimately ended up settling on was the Apophis Trap, which is just, you make Silhouette Rabbit, set the Serpent, Serpent sets the other one, and then you can just like negate Dark Ruler, negate Metal Tronus, whatever you need to negate. Um, and yeah, this was a very very good addition to the deck. I would definitely recommend it going forward if you're trying to play pure Yummy. Some issues we ran into at the event. Some like oversights, I guess, is in the extra deck. We should have played Link Karibo. Um, our combo that we ended on was Herald of the Arclight with Lollipo Synchro and Silhouette Rabbit. And one of the issues I had is sometimes my opponents would just go normal summon Malulu and attack my Herald. And it became kind of awkward because I would have to like use my surprise summon back cookie, make their guy lose 1,000, which I was still winning the game, but then I had to like use 2 interruptions to stop that. If I just had a Link Karibo on my field, it'd be much easier. So that was an oversight on our part in testing. Once we got to the end board, our opponents were just scooping and we didn't get that far. Um, but other than that, yeah, I think our deck was like pretty well prepared. We had a lot of hand traps. We had a lot of stuff to out a lot of the degenerate stuff in the meta. Maybe looking at the format, we should have main deck Droll instead of like this thrust or the droplet, and maybe should have main deck triple imperm. But I think for the most part, I did enjoy the format aside from some of the like sword thumb sticking out with like Molnir lock mainly. But yeah,
Yeah,
I didn't really have a problem with the format. I felt pretty comfortable.
I
yeah.
think the craziest part of that entire thing was the fact that I didn't even know that Yummy had a trap.
Yeah, it's actually not terrible. It's like every time you summon a light beast synchro, you draw a card. It's a continuous trap, and that has a graveyard effect that like is a quick play creature swap.
Oh, so it's a Heat Soul.
Yeah, kind of.
So yeah, Rahan's
But
gonna
yeah,
be playing Yummy from now on.
we had a combo at one point that was like you draw like 2 or 3 with Hyper Librarian, you draw like 2 or 3 with that, and you just like try to turbo draw into like D Barrier and Solemn Judgment and stuff like that. But
I think there was a combo like that that was shown off on stream. I didn't get like a full glimpse into it, but I thought like that premise was pretty cool.
Yeah. So yeah, obviously top 32. A couple other Yummy lists that performed well. I think there were 2 other pure Yummy decks that made top 8, if I remember correctly.
I
The
think
graphic I
it was just
remember.
one pure.
One? Okay, because yeah, the graphic shows 5 marshmallows, and at least 3 of those were Mitsu Yummy, and I'm like, alright, that's probably not the best way to show those lists. I would definitely, I think those decks generally are more Mitsurugi than Yummy. But
For sure.
that's generally just my perspective on it. So my
I guess
tournament ended
question.
up on. Sorry.
Sorry, before we continue, question
Yeah.
for Logan. Why did you bring pure Yummy instead of taking like a deck like Mitsu Yummy?
So in our testing, the Mitsuyumi deck that we had was just consistently losing to like a lot of hands where you just draw your bricks, you draw your awkward cards. I think one thing that we maybe overlooked a little bit with the Mitsuyumi deck is like main decking Droll. We weren't main decking Droll in it. So we were really trying to like battle out games with like one, drawing one low impact non-engine. Where maybe in a lot of those games, if you had a Droll, you had a better chance against some of the other Mitsu decks. But yeah, from our testing, the Mitsuyumi deck was just not that consistent. It was not that much better than it didn't feel better than the pure Yumi deck, and then post side it really didn't feel much better. But I do think that some of the people in top 8 made some optimizations that we didn't have. So it's definitely like a deck I would consider looking at again. And part of it also was just like we had sunk so much time into pure Yummy, and we thought, even if the Mitsuyumi deck is, 2 or 3% better, it's
Hmm,
probably better to play what we know and what we've been playing over trying to switch last minute.
that's fair. I think those are all really good points.
Yeah. So he is doing, or he did the correct thing. So I swapped the Draco Tail, I think Thursday. It's a deck that I've played a fair bit, like we'll say like 2 weeks ago. But in like the past week and a half leading up to the tournament, I played 0 games of it. I was primarily testing Crystron K9. I looked at the Mitsuyami deck a little bit. I looked at some other random decks. Like I was trying to play a Fiend deck. I was trying to do whatever bullshit. But I almost ended up with a Crystron deck. We were like maxing hand traps and just like trying to battle it out. We weren't doing the Mjolnir lock. It was just like a pretty like respectable end board. Which I think I Artifact obviously performed very well for Kamal, so no hate to it. But I in a lot of my games, it didn't feel like it was necessary to win. Like if you got drolled, you were gonna be in a rough spot anyway. So I think the deck would have been a good choice. My primary regret for taking Draco Tail was just that I think it was bad process for me personally. Like my loss round one was because I was relearning my deck, and I missed an illegal action my opponent made. He like used a statue that was negated. So because I was so focused on how I'm supposed to play my deck optimally, I missed that illegal activation. I lose the game, and then I now start off 0-1 in a tournament where you can't like one X2 did not top, so that's just like an unacceptable uh part of the tournament. So this is like the most normal looking Draco Tail list you'll ever see. I played the 2 Branded Fusions, which is I understand the point of it. Like I kind of just like copied like the theory of it behind some other people that I talked to. And it's like additional starters. It's good in Defua, so it's got like benefits. But when I ended on stuff like Albion Sanctifier Dragon, I never actually used the effects. Like it just kind of sat there as like a big threat, which obviously was beneficial. But I honestly the three traps in the main deck was like the real MVP. Like that was so impactful over the course of my tournament. I don't think I'd ever main less than 3 in any like primary Draco Tail deck moving forward. And there were times where I just like drew Branded Fusion and like still lost to Herald. So I was like, okay, what is the actual point of this card if it doesn't actually out Herald? Because they can just or Croaky pop it, they can do whatever to interact with it just to remove the Titanic Cloud. So yeah, overall, like I think the deck was not a bad choice. I had a similar experience with Logan where like most of my matches were like honest Yu-Gi-Oh. It was honestly like a pretty like fine event. Like if you had the perception of what the format was going to be based off of Leo's coverage, and that was my tournament experience. I played against a lot of Yummy, like pretty pure Yummy. I think I played maybe one Mitsu Yummy, and then a lot of like pure Mitsu, just like normal decks. So like for that style of tournament, I think my deck is prepared rather well. I have a lot of hand traps on my list to try and check whatever combo decks are in the format. One decision that I considered that didn't end up doing was playing Feruli over Phantasme. I think that may have helped a little bit against the Crystron deck. I didn't end up playing it, but just like as an observation. Phantasme is obviously good because it helps make Philly Regis. That card is insanely broken, and Jesse was so ahead of the curve. Like most of us weren't even playing this card in the beginning, and this like one of the best cards in the extra deck. Yeah, and also this Artemis was a Spear with Eyes of Blue, which never ended up coming up in terms of like the lock, but making spheres is obviously good. Yeah, just pretty normal list. Played pretty honest Yu-Gi-Oh. I think the deck performed pretty well. 5 mana is just such an absurd card, turn 0. But yeah, nothing crazy to report. I just like went in with the goal of like wanting to have as much interaction on my opponent's turn as possible because I knew the potential of like the Mitsu deck being like a really big threat. So I wanted to have hand traps to prevent as much of that as possible. And the Draco Tail deck I think is really really strong going second when you're not getting barriered. And obviously you're making concessions to that by playing hand traps, but you can't really just like try and break those boards consistently. From our testing, like I was when the Crystron list, I was testing hybrid stuff with like Droplet Super Poly, Ash Fua, maybe throwing a Neighbor Imperm in there. Like pretty consistently, I was still losing. Even if I finished like a full breaker approach, like you just like don't have enough cards. The Yummy deck just has too many layers of interruption. So yeah, like the deck. I would play it again. I just think my process of preparing it Crystron for 10 days prior and then swapping the day before is not my ideal because what I preach to everyone that I talk to and who I coach is just like the format is, especially in this format where the power level of all these decks is very similar, you play what you are most prepared on, what you're going to play the best. So I broke the cardinal rule and unfortunately got punished for it. So kind of
So it's
deserved,
interesting.
but hmm.
It's a bit interesting, like after hearing both of your viewpoints in terms of like your tournament experience, a lot of the discourse online is how bad the format is and how awful it's turned into. But I think like looking at the format and live streams retrospectively, I think those issues are a bit highlighted more so than like your individual tournament runs were. Like you said, most of like your games were like Honest Yu-Gi-Oh, where it was very similar to Lil format, um, and I think that was likely the case because of how close this event was to Lil. Say peer like Mitsu Yami was like the breakout deck at Lil, and this event was perhaps like 2 weeks after Lil. I think there could have been a massive shift in terms of the metagame towards like more degenerate decks. But I think a lot of people did what your cardinal rule was, which is I think they just played with comfort, and they didn't want to switch. Last minute, like they accounted for some of the metagame trends when it comes to like the non-engine. But I think a lot of people like they know their decks, and I think like a 1 week turnaround time is too soon for people to swap decks.
Hmm.
So I think that being said, we can probably expect a lot more degeneracy for Pittsburgh, especially because
100%.
we're not getting a list nor new cards for Pittsburgh.
Yeah, so kind of scrolling through it, like yeah, there's a little bit more Yummy Mitsu than what we saw in the other decks. There's like some pure K9, but yeah, like when you look at the top decks, it's like primarily Yummy Mitsu. Then like when you look at the top 4 decks, it's like Crystron K9, Alex Bergeron's Ryzeal Onomat deck, which is just hand rip, like take as much advantage of board breakers as humanly possible. And then yeah, there's a pure Mitsu deck who perform very well, obviously, but there aren't too many of those round in there because I assume cards like Super Probably were definitely like in a lot more lists this time. So makes it a lot more difficult for the deck to end on a resilient end board when that is a card in a lot of lists. So yeah, Rahan, you watched the stream. How was it from the viewer's perspective, like in real time, and then obviously looking back on it, where you're talking about, yeah, like it's kind of easy to look back and see those games where there were a lot less interaction than you kind of hoped.
So the most noticeable aspect of the viewer experience was how the Topka was untimed. Like genuinely, that actually stood out a lot in terms of how both the Genesis games were untimed, and how Topka was untimed. I think playing wise, it's probably great to have games be untimed, but I think viewing wise, the game is kind of dragged on. Um, you could tell that players were a bit slower. They're a bit, more methodical, which is fine, I guess. Like if you're watching, 1 or 2 games like that. But from the viewing experience wise, it took away a lot of I guess the excitement of the games because they were just like, okay, this is gonna go on for like a while, right? And I think the games themselves actually like dragged down for like quite a bit. Even though I guess like in Top Cut, like there were very like fast instant scoops. In some of the other games that they showed from Top Cut and from like the Genesis Invitational Finals and things like that, the games dragged out a lot. So this was the first time they showed this on an NA stream or I guess yeah on an NA stream and I don't know. I wasn't like my favorite game series of games to watch, but especially because like how drawn out some of the games were. But like I think viewer experience wise, overall it was fine. I will say though, being invested in the TCG and wanting to see like my friends and other co-competitors that were like playing at Anaheim, watching the Genesis games in between kind of really took away from I guess some of the excitement. Like I know it's interesting to see the Genesis gameplay, but at the same time I was like, okay, I wish this was a backup feature match instead. And this is probably very much like just bias and my own personal preference, but I really wish they would have stuck to the backup feature matches instead of just giving us like long drawn out Genesis gameplay. Um, but like I guess it was cool because it's like their first time introducing and incorporating Genesis gameplay. So I guess we'll touch upon this later as well, but like that also helped sort of formulate some first impressions towards Genesis format. Spoiler, they weren't great, but we'll touch on that in a bit.
Yeah, so we can look into a little bit of the top cut list now that we are at that part. So Kamal Crooks won the event with Christian K9. Big congratulations to him. 6 YCS win overall. One of the best to ever do it. And he got top 4 last weekend in Lima, Peru with, I assume, almost identical list, if not very limited changes. So we take a quick peek at that. Heavy K9 package, 1 Sylfefnir, so a pretty limited Christian package, 3 Noroi, Mjolnir in the main, Fua Astral Droplets called by, so just pretty streamlined, wanted to pretty much effectively FTK whenever he wins a die roll. Oh, and additionally 2 Bell, so enough hand traps to hopefully mitigate a lot of the other strong decks in the format. Extra deck, pretty normal, Zeus Typhon, Dagda, Kinkiri, no Azalea. He was doing the lock by using Sylfefnir to pop Dagda, the Mjolnir set. And then side deck is more hand traps. We got 1 Gamma, 2 Delta, some back row hate, Clockwork Knight, 3 Dark Ruler, 1 Thrust, 1 Talents, and 3 Carrier. His deck was winning
Um,
going first, if I had to take a guess.
100%. This is super confirmation bias, but I remember telling a lot of people that were prepping for Anaheim and deciding on non-engine. A lot of the discussion that I saw from people was the placement of Droll on whether it should be in the main deck or the side deck. And I'm pretty sure like every single person that I tested with and helped prepped, they had Droll somewhere in the deck, but I think a large majority of people settled for Droll in the side deck. And I recall saying to a lot of people is that I think if you're gonna take a bet and you want to win the event, I think Droll should have been in the main deck. And this is again super confirmation bias, but seeing that Droll is in Kamal's main deck and Kamal won the event, I wanted to give myself a pat on the back because I was right.
I agree.
I think
I got
Droll
talked
is a
out in the
really good.
Draco deck because like it interacts with the trap cards negatively, but I think going second is just like such a more important aspect of the game right now. Like if you look, there were some discussions on Twitter about like the game 1 win rate in like day 2, and I remember I think Top Cut specifically was like 80% going second. So like you have to just like do everything in your power to maximize your opportunity to win the game. What were you saying, Logan?
I was gonna say, I think Droll is a really good call in the main deck for decks playing like a higher engine count. Like you
Mhm.
see in Kamal's deck here, like Fua, Droll, Droplet are all power cards that you could theoretically win the game going second if you just see one of those. So I think in a deck like Pure Yummy, Droll is a little bit worse because you can pair low impact hand traps. But in a deck like this, you just want to draw like one high impact non engine every game.
And obviously cards like Bell you can top deck into the Draco tail board and like not bad
Yep.
paired, etc. So congratulations to him again, one of the best in the game. I expect to see him do well moving forward, as you do.
There's probably an argument that Kamal might be like the best TCG player in general, like of all time.
Yeah,
Like
He's
in
up
terms
there.
of
performed
like
really
his
well.
other results in other card games.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's. I mean, he top eighted a Pokemon regional from the past calendar year, if I remember correctly. He's
Yeah, this is
dabbled in One Piece as
Pokemon
well.
Worlds.
Like,
I think
yeah,
yeah, One Piece. I think Lorcana. I think he plays as well too.
yeah,
Yeah, I think he went to Pokemon Worlds like, for the past 2 years as well.
yeah,
Yeah,
he is extremely talented at card games. Lovely human to interact with. No, no,
I
no
think
negative.
what played Kamal, one of the things that have like really stood out about his Kamal gameplay, and this is just like TCG gameplay in general, is that he's really focused. Like, and you could genuinely tell how focused he is, because I've played him on several different occasions, and every single time he's like locked in. He's like looking at your play patterns. He can sort of see where you're going with the lines. On his own turn, he's like super locked in, and generally like when a person is that locked in, you could tell by their facial expressions as well. And Kamal just like super poker face and just complete locked in, really difficult player to read. So I think a lot of those like soft skills as a TCG player, he carries across like different card games.
And if I remember correctly, actually, he did well in Hearthstone as well, which is crazy to think that those top skills translated to a game where those aren't even like a consideration, like just straight online. All that. So yes, very talented duelist, great stand-up guy. So very happy for him. This is the second place list. Cameron Neal, who was joking with me before the event that he's going to be playing Genesys very early, and obviously decided to perform well as he does. So pretty, I think, normal for what we, or I guess it's not standardized yet, but I think it's not abnormal. So 9 main deck Yummy Monsters, 2 Cookie, 1 Lollipo, and then 3 of the other ones. He's playing Aramasa and Kusanagi and pre-prep and Futsu. So okay, take it back. Maybe a little bit abnormal. I think I've generally seen either the little guys or pre-prep. I haven't generally seen all of them in the same list. We've got Fua, Ash, Droll, Bell, and then we've got Talents crossed out called by. 2 Mitsu rituals in the main. So yeah, definitely trying to avoid losses to cards like Impulse and all the other considerations. Like drawing the Mitsu package is definitely more beneficial in his deck because when you have more of it in your deck, it's going to perform better in duplicates or like just combinations of those cards. Extra deck, Martial Meta Marcher and the Samsara to make sure you can get back to Herald. Play Zombie Vampire and Gravity Controller, IPSP Dynamondo. And then side deck, Retaliating, Akroki, 3 Storm, 2 Double Cyclone, which shout out to Franco and Cormac, they did last weekend. And then Dark Will No More, Barrier, and Purification. So, Logan, you have probably put the most time into this deck. What is the difference that you saw between this and your testing?
Yeah, I think the reason Cam did well with this is strictly because of the bigger Mitsu package. Like I said in all of our playtesting, we had a lot of games where the Mitsu Yummy deck was losing, where it like only saw Mitsu cards, or like uh they would get cut off of the Yummy cards and they're trying to break boards with only Mitsu cards. And when you're only playing with like 1 Saji, no Futsu, 1 ritual spell, no trap in the side deck, it became pretty difficult to like play through stuff, grind out games, especially like no Futsu. Like Futsu alone is just a house that you can just win games with. Um, I think basically what he did here is he's playing pure Mitsu and he took out like the prosperities and the extra normal summons and stuff and the extras and put in Yummy cards. The deck does have like a few more bricks than normal or like awkward cards, but the upside of this deck is ridiculous, and also its playthrough draw. Like when you draw a yummy name, it's also ridiculous. So I think that was like a major improvement to the deck. I'm still a little hesitant about playing a deck that's built like this because it's what 40, what is this, 42, 43 cards,
43.
and it's 15 non-engine. 3 of his non-engine are really only good going first. Bell and Ash are like somewhat low impact, so it's really only like, I feel like going second if you're not drawing Fua or you're not drawing Drool into the right matchup, you are going to be playing a lot of games with just engine, which can be pretty difficult. However, if you're a good player, you can kind of maneuver those games and try to win them, but it is still pretty difficult and pretty scary, especially in a format with a lot of floodgates and locks.
Yeah, I messaged him after the finals and I was like, congrats on getting second. And he's like, yeah, like I knew going in I had to win the die roll. Like I think he kind of just accepted that with his deck list. Like I think he did like performed very well against a lot of the fair decks, and then if we're being honest, there aren't too many cards that you can draw to beat the unfair decks. Like even if he has like we'll say drop it in his main deck, like that doesn't prevent himself from getting a TK. So I think he probably just accepted that, similar to Kamal, where like Kamal was also maining a lot of going first cards. Like he's wanted to guarantee that going first win rate game 1, and then post and going second you like just try to draw whatever strong fluid roll and then just like gas your way through all the fair boards because it's really difficult to actually prevent those strong going first parts. Like I said in the finals, like even it doesn't matter what you draw, if it's not floodgate hand trap, you're probably gonna lose.
Yeah,
How do you...
one. Sorry, go ahead.
No, this is a complete topic. Go ahead.
I was gonna say one question I have, like, and concern I have about the format going forward is like, for example, with Kamal's deck, what hand traps could you actually play in your main deck to counter that deck? Like,
Never mind. Same question.
yeah, realistically, like we looked at that deck a bit and we're like, okay, if we wanted to play 20 hand traps, there's not 20 hand traps to play that actually stop that deck because Valor doesn't really do anything against that deck. Mortars, whatever, Meows doesn't do anything. Perulia, you might get 2 or 3 draws, but they can still Molnir lock you. There's stuff like DD Crow is like okay, but it's bad against their engine normally unless they're like exactly Molnir locking you. So I'm fairly concerned about the format going forward. I don't know if there's like an actual like counter to that deck. I don't know if there's a shift you can make to like punish people from playing that. So it might just be like a deck that kind of takes over and warps the format.
So I had basically the same question was with regards to like where the format goes from here, but at the same time, I don't think there's like a combination of like actual hand traps that can stop a deck like that when that's just like so focused on going first, that it's willing to sacrifice the ability to go second just in case like to go first, and win that combo for game 1. Um, But I think there are an assortment of cards in the format that do stop it. Like when we were talking for our post Anaheim sort of discussion, we talked a lot about a card like Impulse and how Impulse, like by itself, both can hinder some plays in their deck. For example, whether it be a card like Izuna, Joko, or Noroi, while also at the same time stopping the Mjolnir knock. Because for those of you that don't know, since Impulse prevents you from activating light monster effects, when the Mjolnir is summoned onto your side of the field, since it's a mandatory activation, you're actually not able to activate it because of the Impulse restriction. So a card like that could see play, but then that goes into a whole separate discussion of okay, well, if you're looking into a card like Impulse, what deck can play Impulse and still perform well going second? And so my answer to that was Malice, but
Yeah, pure
I
Mitsu is
got
just
laughed
not a
at.
thing anymore. I agree.
Sad, sad.
Yeah, this deck definitely took advantage of all of the impulses being cut from the Mitsu decks because they swapped over to Yami. Yeah, I agree. That's a good observation. Like, so my losses when I was playing Christian and why I ultimately decided to move off of it was the Yummy matchup felt really, really difficult, even like specifically going second. But if you throw enough hand traps against that deck, like obviously you open Jokul Sulfador, you're in a real fantastic position. But if you purge elements and Ash, Case of K9, like if you don't actually get to the hard monsters in hand, like if you have to search them, then obviously a card like Joel is impactful as well. So if you hard open the names, you're in a great spot. But this leading the spells, I think, made the deck pretty vulnerable. And obviously, if we from what we've seen, these two lists played Joel, but on average, like from the list that we played and what I've talked to other people about, like Joel wasn't a primary card in the main deck, so when you're not getting punished game one in that way, then you're going to be in a pretty good spot just to set up everything that you want and then just go off from there.
Oh, I
Even
just
if you
realized
get
Kamal also playing Droll. Oh my god, I'm the GOAT.
yes, you are. So Alex Bergeron, top four, good friend of mine, going to be in his wedding in a few weeks actually. Love this deck. Not my favorite choice for the event, but deck that I did well at nationals with, and I have a soft spot for. So he's playing two of the Onomat Kage instead of gloves. Because this card is a generic Onomat card, it's searchable off of cards like Goblinberg, Knight, and Warrior. He obviously made like the Flag and Protoss. And Kage also has a second effect where it can banish itself to recycle extra deck monsters. So instead of having to play some silly cards to trigger it or not even play Flag at all, you are now able to resolve Para or any like just get to Warrior, and then that is the full combo to resolve Flag as well. So he plays 3 Para, 3 Tachyon. He made deck 3 Super Poly, which I think was a fantastic call for the weekend. And then in addition to that, Fua, Ash, Droll, and Bell. So again, another Drolls in the main deck. And then this is a 43 card deck. Normal engine in terms of that. Extra deck, we talked about a little bit afterwards. He said he's pretty happy with all of his decisions, but he had to make concessions like not playing Gallant Granite. He didn't play Nib anywhere in his list. He doesn't play Aggregator because he just couldn't find the space for it. Super probably kind of ended up being more important to him. He played Exton Knight, Castell for Harpies on the side. Balance, so obviously because that card is like kind of mandatory to like threaten prayers and surprise and all those good cards. 2 duo draft because that's like the other send, and then Banshee Girl, Maguska, Dagaris, and then Masquerade for the 104, and then Muddragon and Garura as the 2 targets. Side deck, we've got Retaliating Sea, 1 Harpies, 1 Storm, 3 Dark Cooler, 2 Thrust, Evenly Barrier, Judgment, Harpies Featherstorm, and Unbreakable XYZ Barrier, which is searchable off of Gaga Girl. So, Rahan, you probably had the most experience watching this play. I think he has 2 or 3 separate feature matches. So, what did you observe from his games?
So I know he's your friend, but this is like the most degenerate deck of the entire event, bro.
100%.
Included like photos, Harpy's Featherstorm, D Barrier, hand loops. Like he just took he just went on DB and just looked at every single degen card and just stuffed it into his deck. And I think it was a fantastic call. Also really cool because of his success, I was able to like sell some Ryzeal cards and Dota cards like instantly. Like the moment he won against Trif, there are like posts on the Facebook marketplace that I'm in of like people looking for like Ryzeal cards, Dota cards, and I'm like, okay, these cards were unsellable, but now people want them, which is great. So thanks, Alex. Um, but I think this deck was really cool. I know we dabbled with it for Nats format, so just see for it to see success now at this stage, it was really nice to see. Especially because the Ryzeal cards are really good into like hand traps in general. They're really efficient like that. So I thought this deck would have a good Draco Tail and a good Yemi matchup because I know for a lot of people that were working on those lists and just for those standard lists in general, they're very much more so on like the fair hand traps. While in terms of like into like the Mitsu Yemi decks and the Mitsu decks, it capitalizes on the fact that they're playing breakers. So I think this was a really interesting call. The only issue with this, and this is something that we saw happen on feature as well against Trif in top 8, is the deck basically has no answer to D barrier. So it has literally no counterplay. Like at least when you play Draco Tail, you have the counterplay of, oh, I'm gonna hand trap my opponent into submission, and then sit on cards like Molulu and 5 mana, and just, have the option to play on my opponent's turn. This deck basically has nothing. So it kind of went all into that. But other than that, I think this deck was really cool to see in person unfold, and especially for like at the top cut of an event. I think Alex had the chance to actually win the event. Unfortunately, he did misplay in this top 4 game. But I think he's been like out of Yu-Gi-Oh for a bit. Because I know I used to like watch his profiles back in the day, so I know he hasn't been on the competitive scene in a while. But I think this deck had the chance to actually just win the event. So I think it was an insane call. I think he probably did it based on comfort, but like to bring a deck like this into the event and play as well as he did and do as well as he did was really cool to see. So congrats to him.
Agreed. Yeah. Not much more to say. I will say Kamal definitely gave him the opportunity to play in the first place. His uh responses to like looking at like he roided his opponent's hand and then like didn't just like artifact lock him. Like I heard him talking about it afterwards. Like I don't know what I was doing. Like you said he was locked in. It was really funny to hear you say that. And then him like that was one of the only times I've heard him be like, yo, like I don't know what happened. Like I activated case, resolved it, and then just like forgot that I drool checked, and then just like that was like the only time I've ever actually seen him like have like a mental lapse. And obviously he was able to pull it out afterwards in the grind, but it was a crazy thing to like watch, and obviously hear Alex talk about afterwards. Like he had the same thing where he saw the entire line of how to play it out, and then just like didn't summon the code, skipped a step. Now he goes to Banshee, and then he just like kind of falls apart from there. So really unfortunate to see happen to everybody, which sucks, but it's unfortunately part of the game. And hopefully the next time he's in that position, he's able to pull it out because I would like to see my friend do well, and he made a fantastic call for the event. Obviously, it took him as far as it did, and his Swiss run was not easy. Like all of the people on Twitter that were talking about, like he played Trif and Cam and Kamal, like his Swiss was just a bunch of YCS champions. It was not an easy run for him at all. So this is Trif's list. I think he played identical main deck. We're just gonna review this real quick, and then side deck he swapped over to a little bit more breakers. Does not play Dark Spirit Master anymore. He decided to Wusu, which I think is just like a more efficient out to the Lunalight card, but also just like probably better on average. And then just Regeki Dark Hole, Lightning Storm, which I assume are just like for mirror match cards. And then Herald of the Abyss, which we saw get activated, and unfortunately not do as well as we'd like. And then he upped the barrier count to 3. And then I don't know if he's playing 3 Statue last weekend. But he did add in Gorgon, which I think was a good call. That's a card I saw I think a fair amount of Yummy decks playing just to like out Murakumo, and I think it provided some value into Liger Dancer. So any thoughts on this, guys, before we move on into some more overview?
I think this is the deck that only Trif can top with right now. Like I don't foresee anybody else picking up this deck and doing well with it. If Trif's playing it, I think there's a very good chance he's in top 8. But aside from that, I don't think this deck is like super real.
I agree with that. I also don't think. I think this deck really, really relies on the pilot being super skilled and knowing format inside out and knowing his own deck inside out. I think it also relies on several bluffs in terms of actual like gameplay as well, because unless you draw like a super like strong hand where you just like starter after extender after starter extender, I think you can just definitely draw some awkward hands where you could like funnel into lines that you don't actually want to be in. Um, but I think a deck like this, especially since Trif won Lima last week, a deck like this being popularized, I think also is part of the issue. Not issue, I don't know if issue is the right word to say, but it's part of the reason of why degenerate strategies are probably like on the rise as well. Is when you have prominent people top events and win events, I think it leads to like some influence over the format and how people sort of build their decks moving forward. And so a lot of the discussion that I've seen is like, oh, board breakers were the way for this YCS. You have to play super poly, you have to play droplets because like hand traps are just like so ineffective. But then that is what allows like other players to capitalize on this vacuum that's created in terms of like, okay, we know that a lot of top tables is going to be breaker yummy and like breaker Mitsu yummy, things like that. So we're gonna capitalize by playing these degen strategies. So it's very cyclical, and I imagine like by the time like Pittsburgh rolls around, I imagine like 20 hand trap decks to be like super successful by Pittsburgh. So I think it's just like a cycle, and I don't think the metagame is actually that bad. It's really cool because I know right now we were thinking about like how do we stop this K9 Crystron deck from comboing and stopping us and just winning outright and just the game being a coin flip. But I think those type of like puzzles are what makes the format super interactive and super interesting because now this we have like 4 weeks to solve Pittsburgh, and identify okay, well, how can we ensure that people that we prep with and how when we prep, how can we ensure that we have good results in Pittsburgh. So I think this is all super much like a cycle, and it's fun to be part of.
Keeps things fresh for sure. But yeah, like the one that keeps popping on my Twitter, which I think is hilarious, is the new format. Board breakers are good. They're not hand traps become best, and it's just, I think I saw a hash poster where it's like you are here, where it's like realizing that hand traps are actually always the way, which is hilarious because it generally ends up being true. Like there are probably pockets in time when board breakers are good. Obviously, it worked for Trif. I think Super Poly and Drop It, like you acknowledged, were like really good calls for the event, but on average, like we were definitely gonna be taken advantage of. Those were the only obviously what happened to Trif and Topic, which is unfortunate. But that is a concession
One
that you make whenever you deck build in that way.
one thing I think we're glossing over a little bit is there's actually a YCS this weekend also, Brazil.
Oh yes, Sao Paulo, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So
So
we'll see
I'm kind
how.
of curious to see what that'll
Yeah.
look like.
Yeah. So that is also South America, Peru, Central. Remember correctly. Yeah, we will see how the format looks in comparison to Lima, and obviously we'll see what adjustments they make from Anaheim and Bill's experience. Yeah, real quick, we'll look
My
over
my
the. Sorry.
I was just gonna say my guess for Brazil is just going to be a ton of Yummy Mitsu and a ton of K9 Crystron. And then I think Pittsburgh will be I think where we start getting the more like unique changes and like differences in the meta.
I agree.
Yeah, it usually takes like some small amount of time, like you, Rahan acknowledged in the beginning, where people are gonna stick with what's comfortable, and unless people saw Lima and instantly were like, okay, this is the pocket where I'm able to make an adjustment, they feel like there's something that they can do to change. Then they may have whatever been working on it for 2 weeks. But if you have Anaheim this weekend, you see something on Sunday that you think is cool, but you only have let's say 4 days to prep your list and fit. It's generally not enough time for I think to feel comfortable with those adjustments. So definitely
Cough,
when sorry.
cough, Aaron, cough.
Whoa. I am content with my decision making. I'll have some more to say on that as we get towards takeaways. This was the top placing Mitsu list in top four. I think very standard Impulse, which based on our discussion was a pretty important card for his tournament run. Super Poly in his main deck. Retaliating, he also played Fossil Dyna, Roll on the side, Ghost Spell, and Thrust Barrier. So just like pretty normal, and played all the power cards of the form that we've discussed. So makes sense, and obviously probably had a little bit of variance go his way in terms of drawing favorably. Just because the deck does have consistency issues. There aren't too many of this deck in the top 32 overall, but when you're able to play well and play consistently, and then it's a deck that will obviously. Yeah,
I
we'll
think
just.
a
Sorry.
quick comment on Sao Paulo format. I think for anybody that's like prepping for Brazil this upcoming weekend, I think what you can expect is a lot of drill in the main. Like I think that definitely is going to be a shift in like non-engine wise. Is drill is going to be in the main.
Mm-hmm. Which is one of the reasons why I liked the Crystron deck is the K9 cards, I think, give you a lot of opportunities to play through it. Obviously, you have to open Noroi, or if you open like Azuna in addition to something like make some kind of resilient endboard through it. And also the Yummy cards give you some kind of playthrough, but you have to have a more robust Yummy package so you draw enough names to have. So we'll do a brief overview of Genesys before we get into some of our more generic takeaways on Advanced. So we see Eddie Strom winning with Vanquish Soul, which I think is to no one's surprise. That deck got effectively emergency hit, with Holy Sue originally being at 0 points and now being at 10. And I believe there were some other small canine hits that affected the deck. Paradise Smasher also was I think 0 originally, and it's now at like 67. So definitely affected it. But in terms of just like the Vanquishable engine, we're aware of how strong it is. Holy Suit is just such an impressive card as a hand trap. So yeah, we see him in top or as the winner, and then Steven Santoli, who's one of the best Vanquishable players I know in top 8. His loss was to the generator player Hanko Chow, who was just playing a VFD strategy. So as much as it is cool to see innovation, ideally not what I want to see in Genesys format. I played a little bit on ladder earlier today, just kind of like trying to get the experience of it, and there were definitely other VFD decks running around. This is kind of where in our initial discussion, I was like, I kind of want cards to be 101, and VFD I think is one of them. It's not the most impressive floodgate out there, but just in terms of like when you're trying to create a format that is enjoyable and inviting, those types of cards I don't think produce that type of environment. If you could convince me that a card like Baguska is okay at 100 because it is interactable off of a card like Dark Ruler more and Ultimate Slayer, but when it comes to cards like Shockmaster and VFD, they're cards that just can't really interact with because they're quick effects. Obviously, exceptions like XYZ Encore, but it's just like cards that I would prefer to not see in my format overall. Other than that, we see Odeon and Exo Sister. I think those are decks that we've pretty consistently been hearing about in terms of this. Radiant Typhoon also in top 8. Art Mage, which is a deck I have a lot of potential. And then another Vanquishable deck. So if I had to guess, Vanquish will probably hit another kind of hits in the near future. Either Holy Suit costing more or maybe Ash Blossom costing a little bit more. It's kind of hard to say. Rahan, you watched a lot of or a fair amount of the coverage, it sounds like. Did you have any overview thoughts from it?
Yeah, I was just gonna actually piggyback on like the last comment you said about like Ash Blossom costing more. I think the hand traps need to cost less. Um, like a lot of the gameplay that I saw for the Genesis like finals or like qualifier finals, a lot of it just felt like people like establishing a combo going first, and because of like how restrictive it is to build a deck that has both sufficient non-engine while also having a competent engine, people just never had enough hand traps. So a lot of times what I saw was Art Mage would go full combo, and then Pack is trying to crack it with like a memento cards, and he just doesn't have the right cards to be able to crack the board. Or like Odeon goes first, and then you have like some Fur Hire deck that's trying to crack the board, just not to crack the board because you just don't have sufficient non-engine. So that's a consistent feature that I saw, and like genuinely, like that was a repeating issue that I saw for the future matches. So then there was a point where like I just stopped watching the Genesis games because it kind of just became the same thing of like one player goes first, does their combo, the second player doesn't have enough like non-engine, and then they just fold. Then they go first. The other player doesn't have enough non-engine. Then the other person folds. So that was an issue. Obviously, like VS is a bit different because VS with Holy Sue can still like play on the opponent's turn plus combine with some non-engine as well. So it's a bit more interesting that way. And they also have Dimensional Shifter. So, but like that was a repeating trend as well, and I think that's an issue. But at the same time, I was talking to Santoli, and thing that Santoli brought up was that he really enjoyed the Genesis games because all the combo decks he said in the format didn't have any grind game. So basically, you were able to set up a combo, yes, but since breakers are so cheap and a lot of the good ones are actually at zero cost, you were able to use a breaker, crack the opponent's board, and a lot of the time, if they were playing like a good combo deck, they just didn't have non-engine to back it up, which is a repeating issue that we see in the TCG, is where an opponent goes full combo, even if you have a breaker, you still have to like beat the layers of their engine while also competing against a non-engine, which is what makes like the TCG so difficult right now. But that issue just isn't present in Genesis. So that was a really interesting comment that he made that put it a bit more into perspective with cards like Slayer, Dark Ruler, and Gordian Slicer just effectively being free. So I guess playing wise, it's probably like fun to watch, but viewership wise, it wasn't the best viewing experience. But again, super biased because I'm not that deep into Genesis format right now.
Any thoughts on that, Logan?
No, I've never played a game of Genesis, and I've never built the deck of Genesis. I've never watched a game of Genesis yet.
All right, fair enough.
So one day I will have an opinion, but today's not that day.
Okay, YCS Genesis format, he will have an opinion.
I'll have
Yeah.
an opinion by then, yeah.
Yeah, so I played a little bit of ladder earlier, and I was playing a Ghost Second Fusion deck. I'm probably gonna do a video on it at some point just because I was having fun with it. And I chose second, and the first deck I played against was White Forest, which ended on like I think 11 cards on his board and 2 in hand, one of them being Droll and Lockbird. and then the next game or like the next match, I send a deck first. It is a generator deck which rips my hand and VFTs me. And I was like, maybe this going second strategy isn't going to work out as well as I hoped. So we'll see how they continue to make adjustments over the point pool, which I think there's definitely room for improvement. But I think they're approaching like the right idea. I understand that they don't want to have like they're just like the same non-engine in every deck, and I think that's a good approach to have. But they definitely need to mitigate the power level of a lot of cards to make that happen. Just increasing the overall cost of some engine decks or like some of like the more modern decks. Like yeah, like Radiant Typhoon right now is probably about the appropriate power level, but if like Vanquish Soul gets hit too much, then Radiant Typhoon may become a little bit too aggressive. So it's gonna be like a continuous balancing act, and obviously when new sets come in, like it's rare that you see like these types of formats be affected by newer sets as well. So we'll have to see how that plays into it all. I'm hopeful for it. It seems like a neat idea. I was watching some of the qualifiers and they were interesting, but I'm definitely still more interested in the TCG currently. The format is not as I will say utopic as you may have hoped. Like there's still a lot of ignorance in the format. And if I'm gonna play like a lower power level format, I would prefer to not just be getting like advanced experience where I'm just getting hand trapped or not hand trapped, but like just like get out of the game. Like that would be the goal of this system and mitigate that experience.
Sorry, I was gonna say, I will say is there was a lot of excitement for Genesis games. Like in terms of people that I was talking to, a lot of people dropped out early from the main event if they didn't feel confident for their chances and they were losing early on. I had a lot of friends that like just dropped early on to go play like Genesis qualifiers. There was like a lot of Genesis talk on stream, whether it be like inviting players to like showcase their decks. Like the Sous Ship deck is being featured on stream. And then we had like constant like feature matches from like Genesis. So there's a lot of hype for Genesis. And then the other aspect that we talked about in our Genesis coverage episode is how this is going to affect actually like the secondary market. And so after like have seeing all these stream games and seeing like the first actual formal Genesis tournament, we can already start to see like the positive impact it's having on like the market because now Dude went from having like no value to cards like the Radiant Typhoon cards going up. Obviously, like the YCS result also, like the TC result also like impacted it. But it's really cool to see that it's actually having an effect on the secondary market for cards going up, and it's gonna be really interesting to see like with Burst Protocol coming up, how they're gonna balance a list such that the expected cards for the TCG Advanced format are likely just not going to have overlap with Genesis format. And it's going to be an interesting balancing act because, like you said, I think it's really difficult to integrate new cards into a format like this. So, especially when, something's unproven. So, how do you preemptively hit cards such that they're not, the same cards being played for both Advance and Genesis? And I think that's going to be really something really interesting to see with the first release of the set.
Yeah,
Did you
so
guys
that
see
will
the
be.
drama with last turn?
I did. That was hilarious.
Like 7 judges, a call to the R&D department. Like
Yeah.
I expect more of that going forward with Genesis. I'm excited to see that.
Yeah. I mean, as a spectator, I think it's hilarious. As someone in the tournament experience, you're like, hey, that's probably a massive inconvenience. But obviously,
Yeah.
very beginning stages of it, not much you can do about it. It's a card that hasn't been playing however long, ever.
Yeah.
So yeah, we
20 years
will get
plus.
into. We've done like some pretty generic overviews. Logan and I will probably we can go over the like our first experience with the tournament structure and the time rules. I have a bit to say about it. I'll let you go first, and we'll go over like our projections moving forward. So Logan, how was your first experience with the new tournament structure and 50 rounds?
Yeah, so I will start with what I like more, and that's the tournament structure. The like 14 rounds cut to top 8 with like top 32 still getting prizing. Um I enjoyed playing more rounds on day 2. I enjoyed that even though I lost a round on day 2, I was 8-2 and then lost at 8-3. I didn't feel like my weekend was over. I still had more Yu-Gi-Oh to play, and there's still something. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. I couldn't get top 8, but I could still make something out of it. Top 32. And it made the weekend less depressing. Everybody knows the feeling of going to a YCS and you don't top 32. It's just, it feels like, why did I come here? Kind of just bad feeling going home. At least with this, I'm going home with something. I'm going home with like a result. Um, and I think that was just a result of like the new rules and the new structure. So I think that was good. More Yu-Gi-Oh is always better. Um, in terms of like the discussion of like the top and stuff, I don't want to get into it like too much more. I think we discussed it already. My stance on it is it's still a top. I think top 8 is more valuable than top 32, and I don't really know why that's like an argument. Like if you want to try to dissect the difference between, people who got, ninth place and who got eighth place, you can try to do that, but overall they had the same record. I believe both are still a top. In terms of the time rules, from my experience at like locals, and I played one regional under the new time rules, I believe. I never really had a problem. However, at the YCS, playing against better players, I started to have some issues with the time rules. Uh, a lot of my matches were just going longer because people were better at the game and they were, having an easier time playing into my half boards, and I was having an easier time playing into their half boards. Um, and I had at least 3 matches that got very sketchy. My round 1, I had to just concede my game 2 after winning game 1 because like time issues, and I just had to go first in game 3, and even that was like, a battle to win that game and not get a double loss round 1. Later in the tournament, I played against a Yummy Mitsu, and that match just came down to like game 3. I had to draw droll or bust, and I drew droll. I got lucky. And then on day 2, when I played Aaron, we had a really good back and forth game 1. Game 2 probably could have, drug on another 5 or 10 minutes, and it would have been another like good back and forth game. And Aaron just had to kind of concede that one. And then game 3, I got lucky, and he pretty much just bricked. So, but in real terms, like that match could have also very easily been a double loss. How they go about fixing it, I don't know. We can keep saying, maybe we need 5 more minutes, maybe we need 10 more minutes, but I don't know if they're going to do that. I think the real way to fix this is just, as a player, you really, really have to start identifying when you're losing. And even if you're scooping, 30 seconds earlier, a minute earlier, it really adds up. And I can say that, from experiences playing against Aaron game 1, I should have scooped, you know, maybe up to 3 minutes earlier than I did. But even if I scooped 1 or 2 minutes earlier, it would have made a big difference with like side decking and all that. Um, so if you're just picking up like 30 seconds here and there throughout your matches, I think the new time rules will be okay. But I don't think everybody's going to do that. It's going to take a long time for people to kind of accept that. But overall, it wasn't too bad. It wasn't the doom and gloom that some people were saying. It was just kind of, it is what it is.
Yeah, so I'll do the positives as well. I was initially skeptical of the tournament structure. I think it ended up being a positive change. I ended up making day 2 at X3 and like almost making top 32, which I think is a cool change. Obviously, goal is to win the tournament. There's an argument to just like skip out on playing day 2 at all, unless your goal, because it's difficult to like win a Veiler or whatever. But if your goal is there, just like go and play Yu-Gi-Oh and test for future events, like getting more quality games against people that are making day 2 at a YCS, I think that's beneficial. Um, so I was wrong on that. I think the tournament structure change was a positive one. The negative about it, I think, is the top 8 thing. I don't want to get into the discussion like you said, but I think X2 needs to be guaranteed to play in Top Cut. I think that is such an egregious oversight to where everyone from 9th plus had the same record, and one was just like fucked out of tiebreakers. Like that win rate of whatever was 12-2, and just like not making it, I think is absurd. Obviously you can look at X2-1 didn't used to make it at whatever, or like X2s got screwed out of it before. I think when you're adding 3 extra rounds and you still have that same record and there's still these problems, like I think that's just like something that has to be fixed. That like obviously just feels awful as the X2 that doesn't make it, but just in general, like I think that's just not okay from a tournament structure standpoint. That's like the only real complaint I have with it in terms of that. Like I think however they describe it, but just like guaranteeing asymmetric top cut. Sorry. So whatever 9th and 8th play each other for the opportunity to play in top 8. Like whatever, however they want to do it. Just like if the like whatever record is the start of or like the last available spot. So whatever there. So top 8 minimum, and then like when Leo we had X3's top, so like you cut it off at top 8. But if there are only X2s that make top cut, every X2 is guaranteed top cut. So that is the change I would like to see made. Yeah, it was I think a gentleman from Brazil, one of Paolo's friends, who like, came over here and just didn't make top 8, which I think is just insane. So only negative about that. Overall, I think a positive change. Happy to see it moving forward. And day 2 overall moved pretty smoothly, despite it being 256 players, which I think is good. Day 1 had like some surprising extent or like length of round extensions, which I think was abnormal. Hopefully that gets fixed moving forward. But when you make these adjustments for time's sake, and there's still whatever 20+ minute rounds or overtimes, it seems like something that should be fixed moving forward. I think this is the first time North America has had to do this, so we'll see how that improves over time. But if you made these changes and the time thing doesn't like the time between rounds doesn't get fixed, then you're gonna have to start questioning why they made the change in the first place. So
Yeah.
we'll see
Which
how that
I have
improves.
a little bit of insight on that, why those rounds took so long.
Mm.
We had like 3 different rounds where what happened is the match, the time was called in the round, and somebody was trying to concede to their opponent, but it was after the clock had hit 0, and basically just a dispute with the judge whether or not they're allowed to concede once the clock hits 0. And the ruling for all of those was you have to concede with at least 1 second on the clock. Once the clock hits 0, no matter what, you can do whatever, say whatever, it's going to be a double loss. And there's a lot of arguments with that, and I believe several of those like in the same round that got appealed, and then the head judge had to go, one by one. So
Okay.
hopefully going forward, maybe they make an announcement before and we can get rid of some of those, or maybe they just make a change that says, if the clock hits 0, if somebody wants to concede, you have, an instant to, give your opponent the win. I think that would be a good change as well.
I think I prefer where they just make the announcement prior and don't allow it after the fact, because then you could get into the arguments of like, did they roll for the win, whatever. I understand keeping it within that 50-minute time frame. I think that's a good adjustment. So hopefully over the course of time, people understand the time rules a little bit better and make those adjustments and have the awareness prior. So I had some pretty negative experiences with the time rules. My second loss was against Trif, round 8. I get paired up, which is obviously really inconvenient. But we play a very complex 38-minute game 1. He's playing his deck, and I'm playing Draco Tail. I go second. I end up breaking the board and winning a grind. And that game could have gone longer if he didn't scoop when he did. Like, I didn't have game on board, but he kind of saw the writing on the wall and was like, okay, we move on. So we have a 1-minute time extension for a ruling discussion, and there's now 13 minutes to play 2 games. And he's playing a board breaker deck that takes a lot of time to combo. So, I think both of us maybe took a little bit too long throughout the course of the tournament, but like when we're both doing it and it's a hard game, like I don't think there's much you can do about it. And I think this was the primary critique that a lot of people on Twitter had originally, where you're now like being disincentivized to play Yu-Gi-Oh! So my game plan going into game 2 was draw my hand. If I don't draw enough hand trap, scoop immediately, go to game 3. Which is probably like, so if your plan is to do that, it is probably like the human and like the best play to do. Because you are now like because you are most likely not going to be able to play out a full game of Yu-Gi-Oh. So if your opponent, even if they're playing like a normal Yu-Gi-Oh deck like Mitsu, it's still going to take 4 or 5 minutes to combo. If you're going to end up losing that game, like we're getting a double loss in most situations unless your opponent chooses to concede. I look at my hand, I have Ash, I throw it, he continues playing, I scoop, I go to game 3. Now there's 7 minutes left between like our very fast siding, and I draw my hand and I pass. I just can't play a card. So that is just like a really negative experience as someone that won the hardest game of the match, and was punished for it because I wasn't allowed to play game 2 and my hand was whatever, Ash, 3 Draco Tail cards and a Phantasme, and I valued the extra whatever minute and a half that I got off of siding and playing the game out over resolving my Phantasme. You could argue that I shouldn't have had that in the side if that was my game plan, which is fair. That's an oversight that I didn't really account for in terms of like the gameplay. Like that's something that came up for me in real time. So you could argue Phantasm was a bad card to keep in. But if my goal was to like win the match, I'm probably supposed to play out game 2 as long as possible because I won game 1. I can never lose the match if I go to game 3 outside of a double loss. And Trif is a stand-up guy. I assume he would have conceded if we get to that point. But it's unfair of him to be forced to do that and for me to like put him in that position. So I don't really know if there is a good answer to this. Something I'd heard people discuss was if you win game 1, you win the match, if that gets down to it. But then I think it has the same problems as before, where if you win game 1, you're kind of incentivized to just slow play, which is not the goal of this. But then again, like Logan discussed earlier, we had the same issue where we play a pretty long, like 28-minute game 1. You could argue he scoops slightly sooner, but the same thing. We play a 20-minute game 2. I concede with like 7 minutes on the clock, so we go into game 3 with 5 minutes, and same thing where I just like pass. I'm like, okay, well, obviously deck error or whatever, unlucky, but at the same time, the tournament structure kind of facilitated that match structure, which I think is a really negative experience for me. Obviously, you could argue variance, you could argue whatever else, but it feels really bad to like play really good game ones and not be able to play really good games 2 and 3. You could argue side decking mitigates that in general, whatever. But like that was just like a really unfortunate end of my tournament run where I had these really good games and then just like wasn't able to finish the match out under those same circumstances. I'm not sure if you have thoughts on that.
I've heard the discussion come up multiple times, but I think I think the issue is also recency. I'm not saying like
Yeah.
that your sentiments aren't like valid, but I think a good thing would be to judge how often that comes up over the course of, for example, like the season. Um, like I'd imagine like the issue was also the fact that Trif has a 60 card deck, and that's also what contributed and like him playing into your board. But say if it wasn't Trif, I think largely that game probably wouldn't have gone on for that long. And I think he tried to like break your board and like tried to like make sure there was a game
You went
and tried
first.
to squeeze. But I think over the course of the season, I'd be surprised if you had multiple incidences like that.
I have a small like band-aid fix for this, and I think maybe they could consider just on day 2 adding more time to the clock, maybe making day 2 rounds like 55 minutes or an hour. Obviously it's not going to solve every issue, but I think more than likely the matches that are going to get closer into time and have those issues are going to be on day 2 when it's two better players playing against each other. So maybe they could extend day 2 5 or 10 minutes, and that would solve some major issues on that day. But I don't know if that's like an overall fix, but I don't see Konami making like any major changes outside of maybe something small like that.
Yeah,
I
so
think
I
this
mean, as
also
sorry, real quick, I was gonna say, so we've seen like in Yu-Gi-Oh, like in the past we've seen like top 32 get like time extensions or like whatever top 16 at that point. And completely different example, but in poker, like you'll see day one they'll have like 30-minute levels, and then over the course of time they'll go up to 40-minute levels where the stakes get higher, people take longer on their
Yep.
decisions. Like I think that's like an appropriate adjustment, but again, like it doesn't, like you said, like my match against Trip is round 8 day one, so that doesn't fix that problem, and then our match it helps a little bit, but I'm not sure if it fixes the entire problem. Sorry, Rohan, continue.
no, I was actually just gonna talk about the same sentiment.
Okay, so maybe something they can consider. I think so but that I will say that also almost happened. So it happened to me in a side event that I played in, where just like opponent didn't concede in a losing position, and we both got double losses. Um, and by round 10, day one or round day two, sorry. So first round, like we're playing a mirror, and he ends up conceding, and because he's aware that the match is over, but there's still like a minute and a half on the clock, and it's not like completely obvious that I'm winning in the next minute. So it does put a lot of onus on every individual in the tournament to just be aware of the situation, force them to concede in appropriate times, which is not ideal. Like you would like to play out matches if you still have like whatever 10-20% chance of winning the game. Um, so yeah, I understand that this is for tournament structure reasons and policy, but I do think there are definitely a fair amount of negatives to it. Well, like you said, we'll see if this continues to happen. But I think when two quality players, like they're probably better than me at this point, I'm not gonna argue that. But when we played a complex game and we were able to get in that grind, it just feels really negative to kind of be forced to concede game two without even playing the game out when if there's no time in that match and we're playing at a reasonable pace, it's probably like an hour 40 match. So that's just also like game design. Like we're both playing like breaker decks that are able to play a grind game, and we're not just playing like the Crystron FTK strategy. So I think that's definitely a part of it as well. Where this is like the positive parts of the format. We're gonna get to play those grind games, but then you see the other side where like, oh hey, like this is really negative, but also you don't have any issue with the time rule. So I think there's definitely some positives and negatives to take from the entire tournaments. Logan, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I was just gonna say like one major complaint I had for this event, and it was just like a one round thing, is round 3. I had a match that got very, very close to being a double loss. It was a game where like I had to draw a droll or I lost. In that round, I was sitting in the VIP area, and they did not have a functioning clock in the VIP area. And not only that, you could not hear the microphone for the announcements in the VIP area. So everybody in the VIP area on round 3 was just sitting there, and we're like looking around waiting for somebody to tell us to play. and we were like a minute and a half into time before they let us play, and we had no timer like anywhere to be seen, and there was just the judge like walking around saying 35 minutes, 30 minutes, 25 minutes. Like that was like pretty frustrating to have happen in that situation, especially with how much like time matters now compared to before.
That's crazy. You got the inverse VIP treatment.
Literally, yeah, it was awful.
There's no more UDS built, so they feel less obligated. That's definitely been an issue in the past. Hopefully that is something they are able to be more on top of, because this is a problem that has been happening over the course of time. I'm not sure with nationals or the event before
Nationals
that I
had that
attended.
issue as well.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, where like when you have these 1,500 person events, like you have to have ample clocks. Like day one, the same thing. Like if you were playing in like the table 5 to 600 range, there weren't any clocks within a reasonable time or a viewing experience.
Yep.
So that's something that I think they like. You have time on Friday. One thing that I think is a quality of life thing that would also make them more money is they don't run side events on Friday, which is something that Europe does. So if they're able to do that, like you're not doing that, so you should, in my perspective, be able to be on top of setting up the tournament area in the appropriate manner, making sure that people have enough access to clocks, doing all that. So yeah, but the quality of life thing, side events on Friday, having Genesys qualifiers on Friday would be cool. Just doing all of that. Like if your goal is to push the event, like have it more accessible to everybody, because if you're playing the tournament and you want to play Genesys, you can't do both.
Yeah.
So yeah, Rohan, any final thoughts on everything?
No, I think this event had a lot of teething issues because of like how many changes have happened over the course of the past couple of weeks. But it was really interesting to see everything play out and just hearing so much feedback from everyone. I think I'm really excited to like get back into competitive Yu-Gi-Oh in 2026, which is still a while away, but it's gonna be interesting to see how like events like Pittsburgh develop for the coming future.
Anything else, Logan?
Oh no, I think we covered pretty much everything.
Yeah. Alrighty. So next week we'll probably have the same back on. I may try and get someone from Top Cut at Anaheim or the winner of Sao Paulo if I know who that is and can get in contact with them. So we'll try and get a fresh face on so we can discuss some more of this and the future of Yu-Gi-Oh moving up into Pittsburgh. Yeah, like, comment, subscribe. Let us know your thoughts if you were at Anaheim or if you have anything else you want to any comments on our discussion today. Otherwise, thank you for joining, and we'll see you in the next one.